It certainly is a big bag.
It's a very big bag.
Big squishy bag.
It's a very big squishy bag.
Where's the shrimp?
Some shrimp places send all sack and no shrimp.
Where is the shrimp?
At Joe's Shrimp Shack, we sell chola what we modestly call average sized. And you can save 15% on your order by going to joeshrimpshack.com and using promo code Aquarium Guys at checkout.
Where's the damn shrimp?
At Joe's Shrimp Shack, you get more shrimp and less sack.
Hey, where's the shrimp? And the chola one is banned!
Welcome to the Aquarium Guys podcast with your hosts, Jim Colby and Rob Zolson.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Ken. I'm going to try this last name, Wingerter. I think he said it was German. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. He is a blogger, writer for a lot of different columns, and owner of his own online store, hydrospace.store. Ken, how are you doing tonight?
Excellent. Good to be here.
So Ken happens to be an expert on Coldwater Marine tanks, which I don't do a lot of saltwater. I've done some, but not enough to be like, I should try the goldfish variety of the expensive tank market.
I think you just go to Red Lobster and pick one out.
Right. That's
about as close as I'm going to get to doing cold water.
So clearly we need a lot of instruction, and Ken, we're happy to have you on and teach us a thing or three. So I am your host, Rob Zolson.
Hey, I'm Jim Colby, and somewhere out there is Adam Elnashar.
Adam muted himself.
He muted himself?
He doesn't know how to use his computer.
I am. My kids are fighting in the background.
You should just punch him in the throat.
Well, I'm tempted.
He stole their candy. See, it's all starting from Halloween.
That's dad tax. That's not stealing.
That's dad tax. It's not stealing. It's taxation. The government does it all the time.
Where's the representation?
I'm their father. That's all the representation they need.
That's right.
Sounds like communism.
Uh-huh.
Anywho, before we dive into the topic that I frankly don't know a ton about, I've done some homework to try to prep for the podcast.
Oh, that'd be nice to not hear anything from you all day.
You better speak up, Jimmy. That's all I'm saying.
I know nothing. You know that.
You've been to Red Lobster, so
I've been to Red Lobster, so I guess I'm an expert.
I'm glad we got you on, Ken. But before we dive into the topic, we have a couple reviews, questions, and we even have a voicemail to go over.
A voicemail?
Right. So let's start with the good things, right? Let's go with the reviews. So, 5-star, awesome podcast. Got back in the hobby, kept African cichlids for 20 years. Now full-blown into planted tanks. The podcast is informative and entertaining. Keep Adam as a regular on the show. This is the only podcast I've listened to the entire show. Awesome podcast, guys. So that was actually submitted by Adam. We've done some details.
That was from one of Adam's kids. Keep Adam on the show. Right. Well, little does he know that he's going to take over this podcast, so we can have a couple of weeks off.
Right. He's just going to solo it while we go to, I don't know, we
Dairy
can't even
Queen.
go to the Dells
Everything's
anymore.
closed around here. We can go to the Dairy Queen. That's about it.
Everything's closed. So clearly, Adam's fan list grows.
That was 2 people.
Right. That's more than I expected.
You're up to 2 people now? Your mom and your wife. That's fantastic.
Whoever this was and the person that thinks he's hot.
Oh, we know who that is.
We know who that is. So next one is love it. Absolutely addicted to the podcast. Love listening to these while at work. It's weird. I actually feel like we're all friends and I've listened to guys so much. And yes, we are friends. This was submitted from Great Britain. So
really? From over the pond.
Oh, over the pond.
The pond. I like that.
And
well, thanks for listening over there in Great Britain. And call me. I want to know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein.
Last one's love the podcast. Entertaining. And interesting. Looking forward to listening to the rest of the episodes. Keep up the great work, guys, in Australia. So I think that we've made the circulation on the planet. We can get to questions.
Wow.
Unless you want voicemail?
Is it bad, good, or ugly?
All right. So we got this voicemail. It's rather low. So, turn up your speaker for this. But
it's rather low.
It's rather low.
Like our ratings. Yeah.
Like our ratings. But here it is. So I don't know if you caught that, but Jimmy likes to leave voicemails for me, and that was just him going, singing and then calling me a dumbass.
Yeah. Well, we did the podcast back on brackish fish, and we're talking about scat. So I did a little scatting for everybody, and even my son said that was pretty funny, and he's usually a harsh critic.
Jim was probably also sober when he called you a dumbass.
Might have. You don't know.
The truth comes out when you've been drinking. So
That was a note that we clearly need more voicemails. If Jimmy's leaving the voicemail for us, you need to do it. So go to aquariumguyspodcast.com. At the bottom of the website, we have a telephone number. You can text it, or you can leave us a voicemail. We'd much rather have a voicemail because, it is a podcast and your voice matters to us.
Or can't you take like nude photos and send them?
I mean, you could.
No.
I don't want that.
Yeah,
But
the first person will do it.
Can.
Will be your mom.
So I got another text message this week.
Did you?
From a listener. Says, hey guys, love the show. Caught up on every episode. Hoping you can help me with a very noob problem. Started a 35-gallon planted tank before lockdown of the feeder guppies, endlers. You had to clarify.
Clarify that.
And fancy guppies.
Are they feeling suicidal? Because they're such a disappointment.
Both of them together?
Right. That was the first thing I caught, is he's mixing them. Now, in a month 4, I can already tell I'm going to have a real issue soon. I've added some blue-eye rainbow fish, trying to compete, but they aren't a match for insatiable guppies. So I'm assuming he's meaning for food, like the guppies are like ravaging the food before the blue eyes get it. No one wants these endlers, and I can't do anything with the tank right now. How do I keep my tank sustainable? Thanks for the advice. So I had to ask, you seem to elude what's actually happening. I just assumed it was the food. So getting into more information, he said the blue eyes are skittish around the guppies, and guppies are water hogs. Endlers don't stop breeding. It's just going to be unsustainable soon. So it comes down to overcrowded is what I found out. I thought it was food, being overcrowded. And I told them that they'll eat their own young. I mean, you won't have to worry too much. There's plenty of predators in that tank. If they have babies, don't keep trying to scoop them. You can just let them get eaten. That depends on you. Otherwise, have an outlet for these endlers to go to. Shops will just take them in as feeder guppies. So find your outlet, or see if you can even sell them to certain friends. I know Facebook kind of bans live pet sales, but there are definitely plenty of places where you can have an outlet of selling it that isn't on Facebook. So, find that outlet, contact your store. If not, let them eat their own young. That is kind of the nature of the tank. But if it's too crowded in a 36-gallon, maybe set up a bigger tank, because that's always everyone's solution, right, Jimmy?
I would buy 2 more tanks and maybe buy some cichlids, and then you'd have an endless supply of food for them with the endler guppies. Or
you're evil.
Or we could just give Adam's phone number live over the air, and then people could just send their endler guppies to Adam.
8675309.
No, I don't need crossbred guppy garbage ones. Why don't you just feed them to the dojos?
No, my dojos eat a steady diet of candy stolen from Adam's children. All right, well, that's what we got for questions, guys. If you want to participate in questions, you can join us live on Discord, aquariumguyspodcast.com. We have plenty of people in the chat. And just to read the question, hey, Robs and Jim, moving 2 45-gallon tanks and 1 20-gallon tank. All my fish from New York to Tennessee next weekend. Say a prayer for my fish. You guys look good in there. Love the new video feed.
He must have a really great video.
They're looking at me, not you.
Yeah. Because you take up the entire screen. That's why.
No. He's losing weight. He's taking less. He's about 2/3 of the screen now.
Wait, was that a compliment? Because I only like fat shaming.
Well, I still fat shamed you, but I was giving you a compliment on losing at least 5 pounds.
Well, at least 5 pounds.
How much weight have you lost?
So I think I started at like 375, and now I'm like 340.
Wow.
Good job.
Good job.
I've
Congratulations.
lost a small child.
It's like you lost tell everybody that your leg got cut off, and that's how you lost the weight.
It got chopped right off.
That's right.
Well, we have again gone over questions, guys. You got more questions? Certainly let us know in the live chat, aquariumguyspodcast.com. Bottom of the website, you'll find the link to our Discord, and you can join these. We try to do it Monday at about 7 p.m. Central Time, so you come join us. But let's get into our deep dive topic, because I'm still confused why Jimmy just had lobster as the research topic. So
I know nothing about this subject.
Ken, thanks again for coming on the podcast. You got to help us, man. So what, number one, we always ask, what got you into the hobby?
Wow, that goes back a long ways. I grew up in North Dakota, right?
I grew up west of Wahpeton, North Dakota, up by Milner, North Dakota. That's where I grew up. But I don't
Wahpeton?
over by Wahpeton, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I grew up on Standing Rock.
Okay, I know exactly where you came from.
A Selfridge area, a little farm that Dad grew up on, and my grandpa grew up on, and my great grandpa founded. Anyway, not a place, it's really active in the aquarium industry, especially at that time.
Or active in human life.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it was like a big deal to get to go up to Kmart, right?
Yes, it was.
And but in the meanwhile, I'd gotten a book from my grandma or something like that had like all this marine life in it, and it blew my mind. Growing up on the prairie, it seemed so exotic and all that. So I wanted a fish bowl. And one of my first memories actually is coming back from Kmart, clutching a bag with like goldfish in it, in the back. Back then you could just playing with it in the back of the station wagon or whatever on the highway. I got flushed accidentally along with my Walrus Man action figure. My mom flushed it. Looking back, she maybe died, and she was protecting me from the pain of that loss. But I was told it was an accident. It could have been. I'm sure Walrus Man was an accident, but Walrus Man got replaced. The fish did not. It was until I was like 12 I finally got my aquarium, my first aquarium for my birthday. 10-gallon, and that was inspired by a friend of mine who had like a little 5-gallon tank, whatever, with like guppies, and his dad was breeding them. With like the old steel frame, those really old school tanks,
The meta frames.
Just the idea he was breeding fish, and I thought that was so neat. So I got this aquarium for my birthday, and yeah, like I said, growing up in North Dakota, nothing to do. It was something, especially over the winters, to tinker around with. So kind of became a thing when I was young, all the way through high school.
And now it's a, ransom passion project.
Yeah, keep me impoverished.
So, Ken, what is your background? Just, because you have quite the long list. You're a blogger. You write for very popular websites. You write for other columnists. You have your own store. List some of your accomplishments for us and what you do in the aquarium industry.
I've done a lot, actually. Kind of mostly working in LFSs, and other things kind of happened on the side, working in labs. I've done zebrafish. Actually worked 5 years at the Zebrafish International Resource Center in Eugene, Oregon, where I got my biology degree. That was the original zebrafish facility. As you probably know, it's like a model organism now. They're all over the world, these labs, but that was a cool place to do it because it was really experimental. Pond stuff, in food fish, hatchery, stuff like that. I've always kind of been into aquariums, and that's what got me into school. So I moved out west, went to the University of Oregon, got a degree in biology, moved on from there to the aquarium science program out on the coast in Newport near the Oregon Coast Aquarium. So nearby the Hatfield Marine Science Center place. But anyway, did a lot of stuff out there, and then kind of went more full force into the industry, working in hatcheries, ornamental fish hatcheries.
So where are some of the websites and blogs that you've written content for?
Advanced Aquarist actually was when I started doing the Coldwater stuff. In fact, I did like a 3-part for them, and they liked it, asked for more stuff, and then it just kind of went from there, and I just kept writing. But I've written a few dozen articles for them. So they were like my main thing for a long time. They folded more recently, and they're incorporated into reefs.com. I've written for Reefs. I've written for Coral Magazine, Tropical Fish Hobbyist, pretty much everything, really. Done a lot of copy for blogs that companies run, for their commercial websites and stuff like that. That's more of the stuff I don't like the commercial stuff.
Perfect. So how we met, just to give a little background, is you actually added me on Facebook, and I just saw that, our friends match. There are so many friends in the industry that you were friends with. So I literally started searching you, the background of you, because when I get a friend request, I always try to do that as, research the people that are in the industry. And I found that you wrote a wonderful book called The Coldwater Marine Aquarium, Biography, Ecology, and Husbandry. And that was back in 2016. And that's what led me to request having you on the show. So what was the inspiration behind, I think we need a book for this?
So, I was already kind of into aquariums when I was a kid. And again, growing up in the middle of North Dakota, I didn't see the ocean until I was a teenager. I mean, even a glance. So by the time I got out of high school, I was itching to go do something where I could be on the ocean. So anyway, I started working up in Siberia and Alaska on crab fishing vessels.
Jimmy called it. So were you on the Deadliest Catch?
No, this definitely precedes that show. This was a long time ago. This was when I was like 19, 20. I turned 20 and 21 on that boat. But anyway, yeah, it was, it's up in the Arctic. I saw a lot of weird stuff that I had never seen in the industry. Weird anemones, weird starfishes, things like that would pop out on the deck and get made fun of all the time for poking at it in the moments we had to do stuff like that. But that always kind of burned in the back of my mind. Some of that stuff was really, really, really cool. And I always wondered if you could keep it in an aquarium. But then when I moved out west to Oregon, I kind of started seeing some of that stuff again. A lot of those same species even run all the way up and down the west coast from Northern California to Alaska. And I got an idea to maybe try to sell some of that stuff. So I got a license to harvest it. Started a company called Foreshores. And for a couple of years, I was selling to the aquarium hobby and to labs, mostly cold water invertebrates.
Is there a huge demand for that? Is there a lot of different places looking for those type of animals? No,
not at all. It's definitely like a niche thing. You kind of got to really want to really be interested in it. It's just not something you're going to go down to Petco and, fill a tank full of stuff with. It's kind of for the hobbyists that enjoy hunting down things, or doing their own research, DIYing a lot of equipment even. Really, it was really small back then. I lasted a couple of years, went on to do other things, but then a couple friends of mine called me one time and asked if what they thought of the idea of starting like a retailer, almost like a boutique sort of thing. It was like 2012, I think.
So not that long ago.
Online. Well, relative to the industry, I mean, the online live animal sales thing really kind of picked up around then, I would think, especially specialty things. But so they were kind of unsure about it, asked me what I thought, and I said, hell no, I wouldn't even try it, again. And they went ahead and did it anyway. They became Coldwater Marine Aquatics. And they had a really good run. They did fold at one point and have talked about starting up again. But the one thing they had going on around the time that they were running the business was a Facebook page. And even though the business is gone, the page keeps growing and getting a little, more active over time. So that's kind of what came out of that. Now it's people from all over the world actually participate in that. It's a kind of a hardcore niche, actually, that people get really into it.
So normally when you do, I always try to compare the fresh to salt. When you do fresh, people assume that it's easier, and it depends on the species. If you're not doing live corals, I would consider, at least in my limited experience, that it's not necessarily anything more difficult. It's just it has its own caveats, and it always is a little more expensive. Do a water change freely, just to walk over your tap and do a water change on fresh water. There's no cost besides the water that you might pay for in your city. Versus salt water, you have to actually do the salt and chemicals on top of it. So there's a little more cost to it, but I never really associated with a lot more complication until you got to reef. So in cold water scenarios, is it more difficult than warm water, salt water tanks?
You get into like all the gorgonians and things like that, you'll have the same issues you'd have with any NPS kind of system, compounded with challenge keeping the water cold. On the other hand, like the fish are, pretty damn tough. Most of that stuff it's adapted to a less hospitable environment. For the most part, the animals, I would say, are easier to keep. The one thing you don't have to mess with is lighting. That seems to be it's not necessarily a difficult thing, but with the tropical side, people go on the cheap a lot. And I think they fail because they always underestimate what they're going to need as far as lighting. So I think a lot of the cold water people, I don't want to say a lot. Some have gotten into it because they were running on the cheap side. wanted to escape the expenditure on lighting, and they also thought that they could just go out and harvest the stuff and, free livestock, right? And then they're faced with the cost of purchasing and operating a big chiller. So just it depends on what you want. In the end, you should just get what you want, or else it's going to seem like a waste of money, right?
So what are some of the caveats of, say, starting up a tank, just comparing warm to cold water and marine? So is this, I always look up details, and they say that the cycle takes a lot longer and is more difficult. Is that correct?
Yeah, at least that it takes longer. One thing you can do is start it out warmer. Presumably, you're going to be cycling it before you start adding a bunch of livestock, right? So you have the freedom of cycling at any at any temperature that you want. So the recommendation is cycle it at 82, 83 degrees, something like that, and then bring it down after you're satisfied that the cycle is complete.
So what is the temperature of the cold water tanks that you keep? What do you bring them down to?
Sure. Depends on the environment that you're trying to replicate, but the kind of point that everyone goes towards is around like 55 degrees.
Whoa. So it's not like you do in freshwater cold water where you just kind of let it sit for room temperature, where it goes, say your house is 72, it goes like what, 67, 60, 66? You're literally having to force it to go much colder than just room temperature.
Absolutely, yeah. And these animals will die. Unlike freshwater temperate animals, which are adapted, they live in small bodies of water that are subject to really wide temperature fluctuations. For example, they can handle the lower oxygen content that you'll find in warmer water. Cold water animals, the ocean is a pretty stable place. So if they're adapted to 55 degrees, they're expecting 55 degrees.
I guess that's why global warming is such a crisis for the marine life, is because they really can't take the change. I'm just not used to that with fresh.
So ecologists are finding that cold water fauna is steadily moving northwards, and subtropical stuff is moving northwards to fill its place.
So all these items that you put in cold water tanks, are these all deep water species?
But that's a good question. There are actually two different kinds of cold water tanks. One is a deep water tank, or even in the tropics, if you go deep enough below the thermocline, which is, the seawater is layered, right? Because different densities of different water temperatures. So the cold water sinks and it's deeper down. You have those fish that live in the really, really deep water that can get that cold. Most of those, if you're keeping like the tropical deep water stuff, you might shoot for more like 60 degrees, something like that, depending on the biotope. But if you're going with temperate stuff that's extremely northern or southern latitude, then it could be shallow water stuff, tide pool even, staying at pretty cold temperature. So you have your intertidal stuff that's a little more adaptable to temperature fluctuations. And then you have your subtidal stuff. They're never really exposed to that, and they're a lot harder to keep. So in the temperate area, that's another little division, I guess. Find more challenges with the subtidal stuff.
Now, I know over here, down in Minneapolis, there's the Minnesota State Zoo. And for years, they had beluga whales always on display. And they eventually were having so many health issues with these animals because they couldn't keep the water cold enough, which is really strange. You can't keep the water cold enough in northern Minnesota. And they felt the salinity of the water wasn't good enough either and stuff. So they ended up eventually giving those animals to another zoo. Are those, like a beluga whale and stuff, are those a real cold water species?
So are beluga whales cold water species?
Yeah.
Ask the marine guy that keeps an aquarium.
I'm just going to see if I can get one of these for my tank, because I think they're cool as hell.
No, you've seen the documentary Blackfish, Jimmy. Stop it.
Yeah, I watched half of it and turned it off.
So I'm not, I know they're I think they're Arctic actually, or they venture up that way. So
it was a good.
I mean, that's actually an interesting segue. So the thing with a lot of these whales, they live in places where there's a lot of plankton, whether because they feed on it directly or because they're huge fisheries that depend on that plankton. That's one big difference between like the tropics. You're used to seeing like really clear water because it's oligotrophic, it's nutrient poor. Whereas as you run up a latitude closer to the northern or southern pole, the water tends to have more nutrients in it. That has a lot to do with ocean currents and so forth. But anyway, more nutrient rich. So the water up there is really green, just a lot more plankton. So you'll see animals are different. The sessile invertebrates in a cold water system are almost all filter feeders. Have very few zooxanthellate animals. There are a couple notable sea anemones that a lot of people keep that are photosynthetic, but for the most part, it's all feeding. It's heavy feeding. So the struggle is to maintain water quality, usually with these types of systems.
You said water quality. What difference is there? Because even like in freshwater, I always just assume that cold water are easier to deal with. Like maybe it's the species and why we get that with freshwater species. Because our goldfish, for instance, are so hardy. White clouds are so hardy. Our normal traditional cold water species can really take an abuse. But is it that much different to maintain water quality in a cold water tank? Like, what's some of the caveats that make it that way?
I suppose if you have a lot of invertebrates and you feed heavy, because it's kind of wasteful feeding. You just broadcast feeding like plankton and things like that in there that, a lot of it will go to waste. So eventually, that'll build up. And then if your nitrifying filter isn't running at the speed that you might be expecting to, if you have previous experience with a marine tank, then you'll start to see ammonia and nitrite creep up on you really fast. These systems, I would probably recommend some kind of supplemental nitrification, either, like a giant oversized biofilter, and then also maybe a refugium, like a planted refugium.
And that's just because the process is slower, you're saying?
Of nitrification, yeah. So, you can feed it any speed you want, but, and the fish will pretty much produce the ammonia as it accumulates in their bodies. They'll just release it but, the biofilter isn't running at the same speed would if it were at, say, 79 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can have ammonia creep up on you really fast, long after you think the tank is cycled.
So let's assume that we're reading some filter that has, bio balls in it or some sort of media to try to create that biocycle. What do we, in a cold water marine tank, are you looking for more filtration or just simply more biomedia?
Probably more biomedia, more water changes, other filtration and treatment components to help the process along. I know a lot of people some anyway, have successfully used ozone. I don't see that a lot in the tropical side, but seaweeds are a lot bigger in temperate tanks because there are so many more cool seaweeds that you can have in a cold water tank. Some are more like the equivalent of a freshwater planted tank, and those algae release a lot of ions into the water for one thing. So it clears that up. It also helps break down all the organics that accumulate. If you have animals that are, again, gorgonians, they're filter feeding, sea cucumbers, barnacles are a lot bigger, cold water stuff. All these things have to eat, and you just, some of these people just dump it in, the bucket full. So you got to get it out of there one way or the other.
For the newbie listeners, I apologize. For the newbie listeners, you wouldn't explain what the ozone that you're speaking of would be, correct?
So an ozonizer just generates ozone. It oxidizes organic compounds, breaks them down into simpler compounds that are more easily consumed by bacteria, removed by your skimmer, and so forth. Skimmers are a big thing for cold water tanks, really because of the high organics load, but also they help keep the water oxygenated, which is really important, especially if you're not keeping the temperature down as far as you should be. It can be a struggle in the summer for some people if they don't have AC.
Now, going back to the filtration conversation, so generally we have a lot of beginner aquarists don't get a feel for how much filtration they need, especially now with a cold water tank. They really rely on the box instructions. So if a box is rated for an aquarium for 55 gallons, what do you rate a marine tank for say like a biological filter? Would you want to say 3 times the labeled box rate, or what's your rule of thumb on how much biological filtration you're going to be looking at for that same 55-gallon tank?
To be honest, I never really thought about that. I thought of it in that way. I would just recommend oversizing, maybe doubling. But the thing is, I wouldn't rely on one form of filtration. So if a biofilter, for example, said it was rated for a 55-gallon tank, I might double that. But I'd also make sure I had a really good skimmer. I'd use activated carbon and change it religiously. I'd plan on doing a lot of water changes. It all depends on what you're keeping too. Again, like some of these people just want to have like Catalina gobies or something like that. They're not heavy in like the filter feeding animals, in which case it's really the same or even easier than maintaining a tropical equivalent.
Well, I guess the better way of measuring it then, instead of going like a box rate, is a sump. Because generally you have the same mechanical structure in a sump, no matter how big the sump is. The excess size just goes for how much biological media you have. So if you're having a Coldwater Marine tank with the skimmer and all the details, you probably want an oversized sump, correct?
Totally, yeah. You just have to remember that's more water to have to chill. It's more stuff to have to insulate. Yeah, definitely, that helps. One thing about a larger system and oversizing your sump in particular is that it helps stabilize water temperature. So you have a bigger volume of water, obviously that's going to be more stable, but you can also, it makes it a little bit easier to put a fan on. A lot of people, in addition to the chiller, they'll throw a fan on, and it's easier to put that on the sump than it is on their main tank sometimes.
A fan? I mean, I'm thinking, 55 degrees. What benefit's a fan going to do off being that cold? To my
it's going to cool your house down, Robs.
Yeah, it's going to chill your floor.
No, absolutely, it's supplemental, but that's when you're, midsummer and you're running into problems. Knocking the temperature down, evaporative cooling works pretty well, actually. If you can get it down a temperature or two, it may save your tank. Even the difference. Even
if you're sitting like 60 degrees and you want to go to 55, a fan will help get you there.
No. But yeah, like usually a couple degrees. They have some. So you can Teco, I think, is the name of the brand. I haven't seen them in a while, but they made a really kind of badass fan, actually. Controlled everything. It was made for cooling tanks. I don't remember the ratings. Same thing. I've done the same with my tropical tanks when they got really hot. Evaporative cooling works pretty good in a pinch. But again, yeah, you have to have a really good chiller. I would add it should be, there are chiller companies out there that make units just for cold water tanks. And I would certainly recommend that to one that's made for just kind of cooling, a few degrees of drop down on a tropical tank, because the ratings are different.
So you said insulation. What do you need to do for insulating a tank? Do you start getting, collecting foam coolers, or go to your hardware store and get some like foam sheets of insulation? What do you insulate on one of these tanks? Okay,
well, I've seen a lot of different things. I've tried a few of them. Big one is to avoid glass. I think glass sucks. It's a terrible insulator. You do have the double pane glass, if you've heard of that. I think they fill it inner space with argon or something like that. Definitely don't hold me to that, but nitrogen.
Jimmy shaking his head.
Yeah, those might work pretty well. In fact, it's like those, you guys mentioned the lobster tanks or whatever. I think a lot of those old Marineland tanks had that double layered glass. But by the time you figure like how expensive that is, might as well just opt on the acrylic, a nice thick acrylic, because it's a much better insulator, and then you can't break it. And
I assume you're not going to get the sweat either. Like the condensation on the glass.
Well, that's why they use a double pane. A lot of people are familiar with Red Lobster and the different places where you go in there, and their whole thing is they want you to see the lobsters. They don't want that tank sweating, and they do use that double pane glass. And so that's what you almost need, or else you're going to have sweat continuously coming off there. But there again, like you just said, with the acrylic, if you get 1/2 inch acrylic, that's going to be a pretty good insulator.
These guys just took the show.
Is there?
Yeah, it's called sweating, and it's a problem when the temperature and humidity outside of the tank are too much higher temperature than that's inside the tank. Then you'll start getting little beads of water and fog. And there are actually little indicators you can use, little algorithms you can find online to calculate how thick of acrylic you'd need based on how much pull down and what the ambient temperature is going to be. People will use wood, especially for larger tanks. Wood is a really good insulator. They'll build tanks mostly out of wood, and then they'll glaze it in the front, usually with glass then, the very front, double pane glass. I've seen all kinds of things, weird like foamish sort of tanks I worked with at the Marine Center are insulated really well.
So what about the
materials?
What about the equipment? Like you have filters, you have all the other stuff that's maybe, I'm assuming you don't use hang on the back filters, or if you do, you have to buy specialty ones to have some sort of insulation on them, correct?
Yeah, that open top. I don't know. That wouldn't be, there are a lot of reasons you wouldn't use a hang on the back, but one is just, most temperate tanks are going to have a lot more water flow, even in an SPS coral tank. If you're trying to mimic like a rocky intertidal sort of biotope, we're talking about like surge devices, dump buckets, and some, really big pumps. Because you want to, you really want to see that water just churning. You want to see bubbles rolling around. Generally, it's really, really strong water flow, which means bigger pumps, which means a lot of heat input from the pump. So the one thing they usually recommend is an external sort of pump so that it doesn't dump all that heat into the water.
You have to even think, okay, this is like alien world for me. So put yourself in my spot. I'm just thinking there like, I'm going to set up a tank. Number one, I have to make it out of wood or pay a crap ton for double pane insulated glass, or even just do thick acrylic. All right, that's one. Then I have to sit there and what am I going to do for filtration? I'm going to have to go to the hardware store, and if I do a canister filter or even a sump, I'm going to have to insulate the tubing that goes down from the tank down to the sump with like some hardware store, copper line insulation, the rolls that go over it.
Just get a noodle.
Go to Walmart, get yourself one of those foam noodles.
There you go.
Show you.
Just save you some money. Send me the money.
All the PVC. You have to use the thicker PVC
and then on top of it, you have to ask your pump manufacturer, hey, what's the heat rating on your pump? Never heard of that one. Didn't even think that. Like, what else could potentially create heat in the tank? I'm trying to think. A filter. Of course, there's no heater. Pumps. Is there a special type of gravel that you have to use in the bottom? I'm assuming that's just with the species type. There's nothing that you would worry about being cold or that would, do insulation in the bottom because, again, you're using double pane glass or acrylic. It's just crazy. You're essentially building a visible fridge in your home.
Some people use like the big ass beer coolers as sumps.
Just the whole cooler. Just like get a little mini deep freeze and there's your sump.
Drill a bulkhead in it and there you go.
Put a 6-pack of beer in the bottom. Well, you're good to go.
Do you have experience doing that? Just like going and get yourself one of those coolers, and does that work well?
I haven't done that myself. I've seen it done, and it totally makes sense. I mean, great idea. Yeah. Actually, the guys at Coldwater Marine Aquatics, I believe, that started that.
So have you made yourself a homemade aquarium chiller?
No. So you go back in the really old threads for people doing cold water stuff. They've tried everything from beer fridges with coils and coils and coils of garden hose.
Yes, that's what I've done.
Because Rob's a cheap ass.
Just a waste of your time. I mean, when you got to drop the temperature down like 10, 15, maybe even 20 degrees, depending on the ambient. I mean,
all right. So I'm gonna try to challenge that one because I've never had to get down to like as low as 55 consistently. It's always just to make sure the cold water species maintain health. So I've never really sat there and gone, I need a nice low frosty temperature like I drink out of a Culligan machine. But you can still get those mini fridges, our literal mini freezers.
You might use a freezer probably.
Yeah, I figured that would probably work better with the coiled garden hose. We actually did an episode on
Or you could buy a chiller.
some of our like tips, tricks, and hacks, and I described how you can go on like Craigslist, spend $100 to $75 on an old college mini fridge they're throwing out, and where to cut a hole, where to put the 100-foot garden hose. But yeah, for this, the only hope you would have would be a freezer. And even then, like, I don't know, how do you balance that? Because you have to be so precise. There's not a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah, and you can't. It's hard to control them, and they don't really do anything to begin with.
On most of these species, what is the range that you have forgiveness with? If your optimal is 55, they can go down to freezing and up to 65. Is that the forgiveness on most species?
Depends on the species. Some are adapted to tidal pools, so they may even occur fairly far north or far south. But because they are sometimes trapped in these pools and sit in the sunlight for hours, they have evolved the ability to withstand slight thermal stress. But for the most part, these guys, you don't really want to go. When we were talking cold water animals, we're talking stuff that will really start to stress at like 60 degrees.
Really? So is that 55 is optimal, 5 degrees, and they're stressing out? That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Depending on the species, but yeah. If we're going to try to just rule of thumb, sure.
In that case, my beer cooler idea is out.
55 is not that cold either. If you start looking at, especially like if you go very far under the surface, and we're not just talking about like the shore, the intertidal zone, the lower 50s, upper 40s, even like Oregon, Washington, where a lot of this stuff is collected. But again, it depends. If it's cold water, means you need a chiller, and that would be any kind of tank that would, say it's you're replicating a biotope from the Mediterranean, which some people would maybe say is subtropical. But the thing is, yeah, it's not quite as cool, but it's fairly stable. It doesn't shoot up to like 75 degrees or anything like that. So
you had a question.
If you
I apologize. You had a question, Jimmy?
What are the top 4 or 5 things that people keep in these cold water aquariums? I know, like you said, sea cucumbers earlier. I was down in Florida at Seagrass Farms playing with their sea cucumbers, which are a lot of fun to squirt people with and whatnot. But
wait, didn't you just grab them like the Wild Out Boys episode where they put them in their pants and jack them?
No.
Okay. Don't look that up on internet, kids, by the way.
Yeah. No, when we're down at Seagrass Farms and stuff, they're showing us some different things, and they were pulling out sea cucumbers, and everybody was shooting each other with water and stuff, which was a lot of fun. But
oh man,
what are the top 4 or 5 items that people want to keep in their tank?
The things they kind of start their tanks for, at least I'm mostly familiar with like the Pacific Northwest crowd, so they want to go for things that they can collect. Are intertidal things that are pretty. So like giant green sea anemones, if you're familiar with them, they're pretty much like they sound, a humongous green sea anemone. They're one of the few zooxanthellate idarians that you would keep in a tank like that. So they do need the bright light. Those people may end up also getting elegant sea anemones, which occur in the same area, but they look like condylactus almost, like little tiny condylactus. They're kind of whitish with purple tips. And then maybe another thing would be Catalina gobies, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. People just like those as they're colorful and cute, small, hard, easy to keep. That's usually where people will they'll try their hand at like cold water with a nano sort of system and throw like that kind of goby in it. And maybe the other thing's a fluffy sculpin.
I assume zebra gobies as well.
Say what?
Zebra gobies would work as well.
Yeah, I found that they're a little bit less hardy than Catalinas, but yeah, basically the same thing. They're pretty cool. You can breed them real easily. Before
we go too much further into species, we have some questions from the audience. So one of them, is there any specific types of cooling systems for marine cold water aquariums that you recommend? Maybe some name brands that you've tried in the past, because this sounds like it's extremely specific. They're not just going to be able to simply do one search and click on the first chiller. They got to do some homework to make sure it's going to be a real chiller.
And chillers aren't cheap.
Right. Yeah. Especially, like I said, the ones that are actually made for cold water applications. So those are going to be brands that are, they sell probably more to like public aquariums than they do to like hobbyists. And since I've been in this more deeply, a lot of those companies are even gone. There was one called Pacific Coast something. I forget the name. But if you look at Pacific Coast chillers, that might get you there. I've used like Current and brands like that are kind of off the shelf at your LFS. As long as they're oversized, they'll work. I'm trying to think who else. God, it's been so long. So they make little thermoelectric ones for the people that want to do like the nano thing, the first tank. That's about the only time you do anything other than your regular. Basically, they're hooked up. They work the same way as like a refrigerator chiller, but you get these little thermoelectric ones. Yeah, they're called ecosystems. I'll have to try and send you a link for some of the brand names. That's a good one to look at because he manufactures the tank and everything like a whole system. So it's really thick acrylic and it's made with cold water applications in mind.
So what are some of the average price of some of these chillers that we're speaking of?
Price of a used car.
Depends on size, and they're all rated by horsepower. Quarter horsepower can actually do quite a bit. If you have like a small tank, then you're talking like $400 or $500 maybe for a good one. So that's the biggest investment really. After the thicker acrylic, you definitely can't skimp on the chiller, but that's going to be hundreds of dollars.
Otherwise, for something that's say 55 to 75 gallon tank is going to be what, $1,000?
Depending on how it's plumbed and everything like that, you might be able to get away with like a quarter horsepower on that. And I haven't priced chillers lately, but a few $100 at least. Probably thinking more like $1,000 for a tank that size.
There you go. I got a couple more questions here from the audience. I'd like to ask if he's had any experience using electrolysis to aid mineral acceleration in stony corals.
Oh,
essentially electrocute them to keep them electrocute them into growing.
No,
that sounds terrible.
Not yet.
That's what Jimmy does to get me started in the podcast. He just grabs the nipple clamps and we start the show.
And you're the reason we need to get HR in a meeting with you tomorrow,
if you say so. Last one is, how quickly will water evaporate if I try to chill my aquarium by aiming my fan at it?
Well, that depends on the cooling, on the temperature of the water and the velocity of the air, and the humidity in the room. But if it evaporates, just just top it off. It's a lot easier to just top off a tank than to pulling apart a tank, upgrading your chiller or whatever. But I don't know if there's a real hard I don't know if like an algorithm for that. You're not gonna see the evaporation overall that you would in a tropical tank. People mention that a lot. You just don't have to top it off.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It just helps encourage more water changes faster. That and you're humidifying your house, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're monitoring humidity. I mean, we're in Minnesota, so in the summer, it's humid as hell, but you lose a lot of water in the winter. It's so dry, no matter who you are, you're bound to get a nasty nosebleed. So having aquariums in your house and a fan on it, not necessarily the worst thing where we're at.
Yeah, but again, you're not going to see the evap that you would in a cold water tank than you would in a tropical tank. And that's like everybody mentions that. So that's just kind of one of the things to expect. In fact, if you're, and you probably wouldn't be, there are very few things that need a lot of calcium, but if you're using your top off water to dose things, you might find that, you have to do more water changes just to be able to introduce those supplements because you're not topping off like you were used to with a previous tropical system.
So Jimmy, you had a question.
What was it?
I don't remember. I talked about nipple clamps and it's all over.
Yeah, I just went right over my head. So, about 10 years ago, I was granted the opportunity to tour behind the scenes at SeaWorld. Our friends at Seeger's Farms lined it up. They sell quite a few things to SeaWorld. And so we were able to do behind the scenes. And what just simply amazed me is the size of chillers that they have. I mean, the size of cars in the back. I mean, we got to see all the equipment. We got to go back and hold baby penguins. We got to go behind the scenes. We saw the killer Shamu whale.
Is that why security let us take pictures in front of that Shamu statue like he was giving us fellatio?
No. God.
I can post that on our Facebook page.
Yeah, you go ahead and do that. What truly amazed me is the amount of equipment that behind the scenes for the size of the tanks that they have. I want to say that they had twice the amount of equipment in the back area just to try to keep all these filtered and cleared up. Yeah. But what was interesting is they told us that they do run some of the pipe for the plumbing underneath the cold weather penguin exhibit because the cement is so cold. And once that cement is cold, then they run the pipes through it and it abstracts some of the cold to help chill. So my thought is if you had a penguin display also, you could really save a lot of money on this whole thing.
Right. You need to find a way to incorporate your penguin display so you have your marine life working well, right?
But yeah, it's just truly amazing the amount of equipment. And so people are going, oh, their tanks aren't that big, but people don't realize the amount of equipment that you need to keep those tanks chilled, clear, and especially like in outdoors in Florida. I mean, trying to keep some of these exhibits cold. For the people, to watch these inverts and the different fish and stuff. It's just totally incredible and totally blows my mind.
Can I have a tangent just for a moment?
As long as you don't talk about nipple clamps.
No nipple clamps. So I went with you to SeaWorld, and I was horrified. We went through, and SeaWorld was great. We got to see the whales before, the orca whales before they probably got canned. I don't even know if they're showing them anymore. But I know they were limiting stuff when we were there. Everything was just like peeking ahead from the Blackfish movie. And we went to the penguin exhibit, and it was really cool. You get in this like little roller coaster thing. There's TVs everywhere. It's like one giant rolling like projector screen everywhere. And it's like a Disney sing-along. And then they open the doors at the end to show the real live penguins. And at that moment, we're like, oh, penguins. And you look, and this wall of like penguin crap smell.
It was delicious, wasn't it?
Like a truck. It was like freezing, chilled poop smell. I have no idea how they do that, but it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was almost like it was real.
I never want to see a penguin again.
Yeah, penguins aren't the cleanest animals, but it's totally cool. I mean, where else are you going to see a penguin? People go on tangents about SeaWorld and different places, but you know what? Imagine your life, imagine your children, your grandchildren in 20 years, and there's no more SeaWorld, there's no Barnum & Bailey Circus, and there's going to be no more zoos. And the only place your kids are going to see what an animal looks like is on TV until they ban that too. So, I mean, I love zoos. I love SeaWorld. But, I mean, so many people are so dead set against this stuff. And we went down to Barnum & Bailey Circus, Robs. We saw the last show in Tampa, Florida, Barnum & Bailey Ringling Brothers Circus. There was 30,000 people there in the arena, and everybody that was there was saying, I'm coming because I know this is gonna be the last time they're through. But talking to one of the Ringling Brothers people that worked there, I said, "What brought you guys down to this point?" And he says, "The elephants. We don't have elephants anymore. People quit coming. Period." And I realize the elephants need to be out in the wild where they belong. But when you've got 20,000 kids, 30,000 people at these places, these kids see these items and go, you know what? I want to be a biologist. I want to give back. I want to, go and be, what do you want to call it? Like a professor of animalology. Is that the correct term?
I just love that.
Zoology.
Zoology. I mean, there's like a power segue here going from how penguins smell like poop to we need to keep the elephants.
Yeah. It's so funny. Keep elephants. What I'm just saying is that without zoos, without aquariums, people are going to lose their interest. and people aren't going to be keeping aquariums in 50 years if you close up the public aquariums.
Well,
That's what I'm getting at.
100%. That's why I like Project Piaba. I think I said that correctly. I get made fun of a lot for that. That just shows that if we can see these fish that we can't even have because of CITES species, we see them in aquariums, there's more interest in them, love, and then people actually donate dollars because, wow, that was really cool fish. I don't want that to disappear. And they had an interaction, they had a love, and it follows the dollars for conservation. Without that, I mean, there's nothing there. But that was a hell of a tangent.
I'm just saying.
Hell of a tangent.
Just saying. I like my elephants, too.
So I think Jimmy started this podcast like, oh, Coldwater Aquariums, and he was expecting someone from like SeaWorld to come on like, yeah, we got a lot of chillers. Hey, by the way, are whales included?
It was probably the best beluga whale question I've ever had, and you guys just totally made fun of me.
I can't wait till we get like Gary Lang on here and be like, are crocodiles down there?
I'm still waiting for you to get Betty White on, like you keep promising. So,
hey,
and she's not getting any younger, by the way.
Hey, it's COVID season. We have to protect our treasures. Sorry about that tangent, buddy. So, getting back into it, we have more questions. We have recommendations of nano cold water species. So, if someone's just starting wanting to get in this Coldwater Marine idea, they found the chiller, they found some, or either made a custom-made aquarium. What species, invertebrate and fish, would you recommend putting in some sort of nano tank for a cold water species to get started for the first tank?
Besides a beluga whale.
Easiest thing to get a hold of too for someone's first tank and just starting to make connections would be like a Catalina goby, maybe a zebra goby or something like that. You can get those over live aquaria or whatever, but they're hardy. They live in little tanks like that, and they're forgiving about water conditions and even temperature. But some of the other gobies, if you're collecting yourself, you can find these little guys called gunnels, almost like little sort of eel sort of looking things. You'd have to look them up, but they're pretty cool. They come in different, I hate to say it, come in different colors. But they're pretty hardy too. As long as you have a lid, they can crawl out of the tank. For invertebrates, like elegant anemones, that's something else that people can easily collect on the coast where they live. Pretty hardy there too. I've literally just seen them like growing in ditches and stuff where there's runoff from the side of the beach or whatever. Really tough as long as there's light.
Now, are there any species that you recommend for helping cycle the tank? Because you said you could have it warmer to try to cycle the tank. I'm always like put a fish or two, try to get it going for a hardy species. Like I've heard people using sailfin mollies a lot, and I know that they have quite a wide range. Could they be in like these Coldwater Marine habitats even after the cycle?
Yeah. That was totally what I was going to recommend too. Easy to get a hold of, cheap, captive bred. So if you kill it, no big ecological concern there anyway for those that would have that. But yeah, they'll work. You can heat them up during the cycle, and as long as you bring it down slowly enough. One thing you might do there too is if you buy them from a pet store, they're almost certainly in fresh water. So while you're manipulating the water temperature, you might want to kind of gradually up the salinity as well, and bring that up as you bring the temperature down after the cycle. Yeah, that'd be a good one. Actually, hard to think. There's not too many. I guess like some places are bait fish, believe it or not. I think more on the East Coast, you can use these things. They're called a chummy chub something. I don't know. There's some kind of fundulus, like a pup fish or something. Again, I'm drawing a blank, but that's something that might be cheap and hardy that you can use for cycling. I really can't think of an invertebrate. I wouldn't add anything like that until after it was reliably cycled.
So what about any like blennies?
Blennies, yeah. So there's like the Kamahari blenny. You can actually get those sometimes at Petco now, believe it or not. There was a time when those were considered really rare. They're subtropical, but and I found from personal experience they don't like really, really cold water. But if you're running something like in the upper 50s, lower 60s, they'll tolerate that. They're pretty cool looking. Black with like an icy blue stripe on the side. Myacanthus genus. They're a fang blenny, so they swim out in the open. So they're not just going to lay on the bottom like a normal boring blenny. There's some other ones. There are a lot of, they're just not they're not widely available in the trade. So you kind of have to, you kind of have to look for this stuff. There's I think they're called Matsuna. It's like the only collector I know of right now that deals in any way with like private aquarists. They're based out of California, and you can find them pretty easily on Coldwater Marine Aquarium Keepers, which is the Facebook page that I mentioned earlier, started and still ran by the guys who once operated Coldwater Marine Aquatics. They collected and sold livestock to the hobbyists up till about a few years ago, I think. Yeah, stuff isn't easy to get, but it's one of those things where you just kind of gotta look for it when it comes in. I've actually gotten stuff that came in by accident. Things just get collected and traded from, and people will be like, you'll work in the fish store or whatever, and you'll be, well, what the hell is that? And you look it up online, and its favored temperature is 50 something. That happens every once in a while. And you keep your eye out for that. You might be able, that, or you may be able to actually order stuff. There are always these oddities at the back of the fish list that people in the LFSs are never going to order unless you ask for them. That's a good place to start, honestly. But, talking to people is the best way, really. And then getting in on like group buys is a big thing when people are importing things either from like the British Isles or Australia, where the shipping is really prohibitive there. That's the main reason. But there are people actively collecting that stuff down there. It's just to get it up here is really expensive and kind of a pain in the butt. So that's why people get in on these. They pool their resources and get all this stuff at once, and then kind of distribute it once it gets here.
It kind of sounds like an underground movement of hobbyists that are happy to spend $1,000 on a tank so they can get a free fish out of a mud puddle. Does that sound right?
You get both ends. You get the people that are, at least they start it thinking that they're going to get into saltwater on the cheap, either because they think they're going to collect their own things, which there are two reasons you can't do. One, it's not legal. You have to buy all these permits, and then you're limited as to what you can take. And if you're not well organized, you can't, you have to, not a lot of species are just sitting there on the beach for you to pick up and walk away with. It takes a little bit of expertise and research to know how to find and get these animals. And then the other thing is, when I had my company, I lived just, a couple of hours inland, but that actually made it kind of tough, even being that close to the coast, particularly in the summer, because you collect this stuff and then you got to rush home because as it gets warm in those little containers, it's already dying from the moment you've, you bagged it. So anyway, it takes a little bit of research and diligence to get a hold of this stuff. Again, I'd stress that's why I think a lot of people like this. They want to have things no one else has had. Those are more the other end. You get the more cheaper people, and then at the other end you get the people that are they've already tried in the reef aquarium hobby. They're frankly bored with it and just stumble upon this stuff. And just they fixate on, like, they want a certain kind of cold water tank, even animals all from one area or whatever. And yeah, you can invest a lot of money in it if you really want to.
So before we let you leave, we have to ask the question that fans demand. Anytime we talk about saltwater aquariums, we always talk about hitchhikers on a lot of the stuff people get, because, live rock used to come directly from the sea, and they'd get horrible monsters that come up.
Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster.
Right, that come up in
Bigfoot.
In the live rock. So when you're collecting, there are certain specimens, either vertebrates or whatever you're trying to collect out in the wild. What cold water hitchhikers do you have to worry about or are common to see?
It's a lot of weird stuff, actually. There are these things called skeleton shrimp. They're little hitchhikers that can I don't think they're all that harmful, but they're just weird to find. It's mainly when you collect like seaweeds and things like that, you'll get all kinds of different isopods and whatever. And because this is sort of there's not as much knowledge and information out there about cold water stuff. So half the time you don't even know what it is, and you don't know if it's good or bad, right? You'll find like you get like, believe it or not, I've got like sea spiders, Pycnopodia, these weird things that they're like parasites on sea anemones and stuff. They actually are spiders. And they just come out of nowhere and you're like, what the hell is that? And you spend a lot of time either on a forum or just doing your own research trying to figure out what it is. I've had really cool sea slugs come in as hitchhikers, and luckily I had the very thing they eat come in as a hitchhiker also. So they lasted as long as that hydroid or whatever it is they're specialized on feeding on, comes with them in the tank. That's the cool thing about this, and especially when you're collecting your own stuff, including your own rock and sand, is it's going to come loaded with all kinds of weird critters. And then as they pop up, you're spending all your time either doing your own research or picking people's brains on a Facebook page or whatever.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, one of my friends took his family across country. He rented a motorhome, and they wanted to go through Yellowstone, but they also wanted to go out on the coast. And they were out by Oregon, and they went and found the tidal pools and whatnot. And one of the most interesting things he said, they all grabbed just ice cream pails. They brought them along because they just wanted to go out and just see what they could kind of collect, and they weren't going to bring them home. They just wanted to see what they could find and stuff. And they were collecting the different seaweeds. And they would just put the seaweed in the pail and then just kind of squish it and just see what would come out. And he said there was just all kinds of interesting looking little crabs and slugs and different weird things that they've never seen before. And he said that was probably the most interesting afternoon we spent, out on the coast, is because his kids have a sense they just love aquariums also and stuff, and they just had so much fun out there. And then they went and found a nice seafood restaurant down there, and they took them out and they caught their own lobsters for lunch with cages or whatnot, and said it was one of the best afternoons they had on their 2-week trip. But he said it was just incredible, the amount of stuff that would come out of the seaweed. He goes, you look at the seaweed, there's nothing there. But when he swished it in the pail, it was just full. The pail was full after they pulled the seaweed out of just different interesting things.
Oregon coast in particular, it's like it's dominated by mussels in a lot of areas. Some of the tide pools by like just, those two main species of sea anemone live in the upper shore, the giant green and the elegant. It looks like there isn't a lot of diversity until you start digging in. And then, like imagine taking that seaweed home and having it sit in, stew in your tank for a while, and all the weird things that pop out of it. That's really the fun thing about it. When you've collected it yourself, that's one of the big attractions, I think, to people that do this here. There's a whole group in the UK that, an equivalent. And half of it is just dominated by what you find after the fact that came out of the sand, or you asked what kind of gravel. Some people will use like the crushed coral, things like that. I've seen that in some cold water tanks. It doesn't hurt. But this crowd really likes to completely recreate an area as they found it. So they will actually collect all of the sand or gravel or hash or whatever is, type of substrate is there. They'll take that type of rock, if the law allows, and bring all that back with them and kind of reassemble it, right? As best they can, the way they found it. So it's just different than like having this hodgepodge of things that you just, got from different stores or whatever. It's kind of a different experience. And it's more like the one that the original marine aquarists had, because there was a time where everyone had to collect their own stuff, had to grow their own live foods even. So, again, it's like the DIY aspect and also do your own research. Part of this, I think, is, keeps a lot of people in this niche.
I think a lot of this goes back to, you said earlier that you grew up in North Dakota. I also grew up in North Dakota. Not a lot of things to do there, honestly. But if you could find yourself down to the local creek, you could entertain yourself all afternoon we used to go down and just take a stick, and you'd see a crawfish, and you would just hang off the bank for hours looking for crawfish, and you would take the stick and poke at them until they would get mad at you, and they would grab a hold of the stick, and then if you pulled the stick out fast enough, you could get them on shore and take them home. And we would spend hours down there seeing what different minnows and different things you could see through there. Every once in a while, you'd see a snake go in the water and go after minnows and stuff. And I mean, that was our form of entertainment as we were younger. And I think that takes a lot of people back, starting out your own cold water tanks. I mean, a lot of people that probably grew up in that area just want to recreate that at home, like so many of us want to do.
I totally agree. There's like that. I think a lot of the people that could order things that are from elsewhere just don't want to put it in there because, that's their intention is to recreate a particular environment. It's hard to order a bunch of stuff, especially the rock and sand from a particular area. So they just focus on the one where they're at and make it a day. Out and like their waders and their dip nets and a case of beer or whatever, and just, make a day of it. The Oregon coast, the Washington coast, they're beautiful places. So it just adds a whole different element, where you get out there and you're actually seeing the environment from which these animals came. So you have a way of kind of surveying how things look. Some people will actually, take water tests even, so they know, what to recreate in their systems when they get back. They take a lot of notes. Definitely something more like it's a lot more proactive.
Well, before I go into the last thing, is there anything that you feel that we've missed as far as trying to dive into the world of Coldwater Aquarium? Again, we only get you for about an hour, so I know there's only so much we can do. But is there any important topics you think we need to cover yet?
Just in terms of people, so. Getting into the audience's head, I think they would still be wondering what the real difference is between this stuff and tropical stuff, right? It's like, why even do this? It's like, what's the difference? I don't need as much light, but I need a chiller. It's not that isn't necessarily going to really rouse anyone's curiosity or anything. So I would say this, like, if you look at the animals themselves, you'll find that they're completely different colors. The cold water animals are predominantly like orangish, reddish, colors, whereas like the corals we're most familiar with tend to be like purples and pinks and so forth. But rock is different. Instead of having like this live rock that's made from, mostly from, coral skeleton aggregate and so forth. It's like there's a lot more variation depending on where you collect it from. So it might be like this basaltic sort of cool, jaggedy black, stuff or granite or whatever. But in any case, you're always trying to recreate it. But anyway, you have like almost looks like I don't know. I think the animals look more primitive or something, more like robust because of the types of environments they live in.
A little more prehistoric.
Yeah, definitely. Which is interesting because they're more highly evolved. Most of the cold water species invaded those areas from tropical areas. So they're actually, from evolutionary history, they're actually younger species. But yeah, they're different looking. They behave differently. They really like to eat. They're in a lot of ways they're more like a freshwater sort of tank. And that, it's people really like to dump food and watch things fight over it and stuff like that. It's more these animals are more like pets, I would say. Yeah, it's a whole different experience for people that have already had reef tanks. It might even be a somewhat familiar experience to people that have had freshwater tanks, because aside with the obvious difference of the salt, the systems, just the way they run and the way the animals behave are probably more similar, I think, to like freshwater fish.
They're more robust. They're fish for men. Get into Coldwater Marine.
Yeah, that's the macho side of the marine aquarium keeping right there.
I can just see your PR team. Don't be a bitch. Get a chiller. I love it. Well, again,
there's one other thing I would say, and because because I'm not going to let you guys go now that we start talking about this. I'm in nerd mode, but
Hey, that's where we need to get you.
There's the aspect, and there are definitely people that like the technology and everything in the reef side. But once you get into Coldwater, that's why it was attractive to me, I think, is because it's more like you're looking into the ecology, interaction between the animals, the effects of all the foods you put in the water and all that. It's more of like an ecosystem, and particularly because you build it yourself, often from animals you collected from the wild and even the aquascaping materials. It's more for like someone who's more more interested in the biology than the technology. So you can definitely go there if you want with all the chilling equipment and stuff like that. But it's like I've already, I was at a total loss, like giving names for brands and stuff. And I come on here as like an expert, but I've never really cared about all that stuff. To me, it was more about finding these animals and putting them together and displaying them in a way that, really replicated this really cool environment.
Well, I think that stands testament that chillers last a while. They're not like the throwaway equipment. You're spending quite a bit of money on it. And clearly, if you haven't needed to shop a bunch of times for chillers, that's a statement right there that it's an investment worth doing.
They do need occasional repairs and stuff like that, but it's not a cheap. It isn't a cheap piece of equipment. That's the one thing where you really can't skimp on the money or on the research. You really have to know what you're going to need before. People make the mistake of getting too big of a tank. And then it's so hard to follow up with everything else they need after the tank, if you know what I mean. It's like they insist on having, like, say, whatever, 65-gallon tank. And they think that will work with their budget. But then all of a sudden, they're skimping on the size of the chiller, the size of the biofilter, and all these other things. So with Coldwater, one thing I would just suggest is to start really small, particularly because you're already going to be spending more on the tank. Even if it's a small tank, they often don't make really, unless it's for Coldwater, they don't make really small tanks that have the extra thick acrylic. But in that case where you have that much more surface area to volume, it's really important to have really thick acrylic. So there's just a bunch of considerations to make beforehand, particularly if you're like me and you're not into like the technology and physics and all that stuff. The best place to go is to just hit a forum or the Facebook page I mentioned, talk to some of those people and get some ideas before you start throwing money down.
And tell them, Ken Wing sent you. That way you get the VIP treatment when you go to that Facebook page.
Absolutely.
So before we leave, you mentioned before your store. The best way I can describe it is, can you tell us more about your, tasty version of vitamin water?
I suffer pretty badly from attention deficit disorder, and it seeps into my professional life. So I haven't done anything with like Coldwater really in a long time, to be honest. I bounced around all kinds of different things, and about 2 years ago, I settled on the microbiological aspect of aquarium keeping. And at that time, I was working with a company called Algae Barn, and always trying to get them to carry this particular type of bacteria. Because it just like worked really well with what they were trying to do and what their clients were trying to do in terms of water quality management, the approach. And that never happened. And after I left them, I kept that idea in my head and just jumped in and started a company out of it. And this time it's actually like growing into a regular thing. It's like kind of my day job at this point. But anyway, what it is it's purple non-sulfur bacteria. Not a lot of people have heard of it yet, but I know they will, partly because it's already really important in aquaculture. So it's used not a lot on fish farms to remediate water quality. It's for fresh and salt water. It's an extremely ancient photosynthetic bacteria. It's pretty much ubiquitous in nature, but it gets eliminated from a lot of artificial systems, aquariums, just based on competition with other bacteria, or inherent stresses from us cleaning our tanks, things like that. But it's naturally occurring. What they do is they cycle nitrogen, they cycle phosphate, and they cycle sulfur. And in an aquarium, what you would expect them to do, much of what they are being used for in fish farms, is to remove nitrate and ammonia and phosphate. And they also consume organics as a carbon source. So anyway, yeah, they reduce your need for like activated carbon, for example, reduce the frequency with which you have to do water changes. And they're also probiotic. So a lot of people add them to foods for different things. They practically say, I know they're good for shrimp, basically saved, like it's like a food shrimp, but basically saved that industry because of a vibriotic bacteria that was causing a really bad disease. So same thing with corals. They live like symbiotically with corals because they also fix, to go way off on this. So they fix nitrogen. And a lot of organisms we would add in our aquariums that fix nitrogen, meaning they can take nitrogen gas and make ammonium out of it, which they used to make tissues and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that's the opposite of denitrification. And that's why in a coral reef environment, these corals, the last 15 years of research is pointing more towards these bacteria as being really important. Now calling the coral holobiont, which is basically a whole bunch of organisms that they consider like a superorganism. And this type of bacteria is one of them because it's able to basically provide nutrients to the zooxanthellae in a nutrient-poor environment. So that's the gist of it. There's a lot more to it than that beyond the scope of this show, I'm sure. But I've had that company going for about a year now.
I got a private message from one of the listeners. Is this safe to use at all in fresh or water or brackish aquariums?
The bacteria?
Yes, this P&S Pro Bio that you're selling on your site.
Yeah, so it's mostly found in freshwater environments. It favors freshwater environments, but it'll survive in hypersaline environments even. So it's euryhaline, meaning it survives in the salinity of any kind of aquarium we would keep, basically. And as far as safe, yeah, it's non-pathogenic, so it can't hurt anything. All it does is stabilizes your nitrogen cycle, and it will consume like organic rubbish dissolved in solid. In a freshwater system, for example, you would use this like with plants. So you have like cellulose, lignin, all these things that higher plants produce, right? And it makes all this rubbish that ponds too. It doesn't degrade easily because not a lot of organisms possess the enzymes make them able to break it down and digest it. This bacteria does. So anyway, they use it a lot. You'll actually see this bacteria in some formulas or whatever, like bacterial products that are used to, they call them sludge eliminators. So they'll eat up all that plant material. But also because they fix nitrogen, they fertilize plants. So they work really well with freshwater plants. And they live in direct association with them, in fact.
I might have to give this a try now.
Now,
just to get rid of my sludge.
what's the shelf life on something like that?
And do you have to freeze it, put it in the fridge?
No. So this stuff it's a really ancient bacteria. It evolved before there was even oxygen on Earth. So it'll live in anaerobic, it prefers anaerobic environments, but it can live in the presence of oxygen. A lot of those types of bacteria. It's also, it favors high temperatures. So it really likes the heat. Like, you can keep it in the bottle. This is like the shelf life bottle, or like the shelf, like bottling it, whatever, shelving it. It can survive indefinitely at temperatures over like 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And it has like a shelf life. I've used this. I use my own product to inoculate new batches so that I know that it's always viable, right? My expiration is like 6 months on my product. But I've recently, just to test and see how long they last, I had one that was exactly a year old, was able to start a new culture with it. So stuff's like tough as nails, really. It's one of the most, it's regarded by microbiologists as being one of the most adaptable organisms on Earth, metabolically.
Now, you said it was a big benefit towards shrimp, cold water shrimp that you eat. Would this be beneficial for ornamental shrimp?
Yeah, in terms of being a probiotic, yes. All organisms, actually. I've recently seen this stuff. The same species, Rhodopseudomonas palustris, is included in human probiotics. I've seen papers. So I've read a lot about this stuff, and I've seen, on the side, weird things where it increases broiler chicken production. And when you put it in their drinking water, it's just a general probiotic. So it gets in the animal's gut and it increases feed conversion. So basically the animal, when it eats, is able to assimilate more of its food because this organism helps it to digest it, like a lot of probiotics. But then it also protects it from pathogens like Vibrio, which commonly affect shrimp. So there was some kind of disease. I can't remember the name of it, but it was in the food fish industry, the shrimp species. But anyway, this stuff it produces antibiotics, mainly streptomycin and kanamycin, which Vibrio is not resistant to. So it actually works as a natural antibiotic inside the fish, and it's proven to survive in the gut for at least some amount of time. So aside from that, increasing the feed conversion, what it does, in addition to, when you get more out of your food when you feed your fish, but you get less out of the fish, meaning they crap less, they produce less waste. So, when you add it that way, the fish are actually producing less waste, but then the waste they do produce in the form of ammonia, nitrate, phosphate, and dissolved organics and solid organics, this bacteria can eat it all. And, it just, like in a saltwater tank, it would just get skimmed off. It would get removed, in your water changes. It's never going to cloud your water or anything like that because it prefers anaerobic sorts of environments. So it's not harmful in any way.
How often do you treat the tank with that then? How far does a bottle go?
Yeah, so most people would inoculate the tank and then see if it depends, what you're trying to do. So say you have a freshwater tank and it's a planted tank and maybe you put too many fish in it. So you're having issues with phosphates. Some people would inoculate it, use whatever they could out of the bottle, how many doses would depend on the size of the tank. But it's just kind of up to the aquarist to see how many doses it takes until they get the results they want. But say you're trying to reduce phosphates, that would just take as many doses, maybe only one, if the bacteria establishes itself in the system. It would be in anaerobic and moderately illuminated areas. So this stuff would grow basically. So I guess using the example of a planted tank, this bacteria would live, it'd kind of form like a biofilm slightly under the top of the substrate. It's a little bit where there's less oxygen, the light is still penetrating. And it would, so basically it takes all the, in that case, it would take a lot of carbon in the form of zoodates from the roots of the plants, all these waste products, organic waste products that the plants secrete through their roots and leaves. It'll take all that up as a carbon source. And then as a nitrogen source, it'll pull out nitrate, things like that from the water. So, and phosphate. So it would compete with algae in that way. Basically, for phosphate, this stuff they've used this for wastewater treatment. can remove phosphates at levels you'll never see in an aquarium. But in terms of like dosing for like a small tank, you just kind of see what what the problem is. Some people, and then, when it's solved, it's solved. But I know that sounds vague, but it definitely works. The stuff really does do all the stuff we say it does. This is one of the most researched microorganisms that there is, because a lot of people have been looking into using it for hydrogen production. So it's been studied for a pretty long time, pretty well. So like, say if you're using it in a saltwater tank, for example, to feed your corals, and dosage would be on like a regular basis, like an ongoing thing. You can use it to gut load live foods too. So anyone fresh or salt water, say, especially if you're raising fish, this is an excellent organism to gut load your live feed with, because it comes with carotenoids. It comes with, very importantly, probiotics, and helps them digest their foods, which they're one of the critical gut flora of a larval fish. So lots of different uses.
And the best use is because it has the same bottle structure as like what are those teas? Go to your local store, replace the label, and give it to Jimmy specifically. Just see
the bottle's a little bit suggestive, and as it is, and the product is called, so the bacteria one is called PNS Probio, and I guess PNS sounds very similar to a word that certain sophomoric individuals get a rise out of,
Like Robbie.
So don't worry, I already typed it in chat. We had a good one. I'm back and forth, so we're above that, aren't we, Jimmy?
You are.
We are.
Rob's is not above it.
Well, again, if you're looking for this probiotic, certainly go to hydrospace.store. And again, we'll have the link in the description of this podcast. Certainly check it out. Also, go to Amazon, check out Ken's book on the... I had this saved. I had it saved right in front of me.
So unprofessional. You suck.
Oh, man.
You suck.
The Coldwater Marine Aquarium, biogeography, ecology, and husbandry.
Again, the link is in the description of that as well. And again, Ken, thanks so much for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we're going to see some beer cooler sumps happening in the future here.
So, a pleasure, guys.
And I think Adam disconnected, so we wish you well, sir.
You as well. Take care.
Before we leave, just a reminder to the listeners, we're going to be having Dr. Fish in an episode or two. So certainly go to our Discord or send us a message directly to have your question answered live by Seacrest's head of fish health. And we'll get those done. No question is too much or too little. In fact, if we can get some, more poo-related questions about penguins, that's even okay too. Right, Jimmy?
I'm going to have questions about beluga whales. Just because I didn't get my question
He'll
answered
just look
today
at you
about
and
beluga whales.
He'll look at you like I'm not an expert in whales. Next question.
Next question, please.
Next question.
He's kind of like the president. Next question.
In mammal zoology here.
Right? Oh, Adam's back.
I've been here the whole time. Could you guys not hear me?
We couldn't.
Could not hear you at all.
Any last questions for Ken before we leave, Adam?
Well, actually, I did have a question about saltwater mixing. You know how saltwater, you have to use less salt water or salt in the water when it's warmer. How do you just like jack up the temperature to mix the salt and then you decrease it, or does your salinity levels change in between the two, or no?
So if you're using like a density measuring sort of device, like a hydrometer or something, yeah, a little bit, but it's like a slight difference. You can figure out how to offset that if you really want to, but no one really ever it has, if you get in the one area that you need to be in and stick to it, consistency is more important than accuracy there. Your typical 35 parts per thousand.
Okay. That was my question.
So don't overthink it, Adam. Just
Not that one.
All right, Jimmy, as we leave, can you give the audience your best beluga impression? Come on, man.
I didn't even know what a beluga sounds like.
Right. That's why you got to give us an impression. Give what the audience demands. All right. And that, we bid thee adieu. See you next week. Thanks, guys, for listening to the podcast. Please go to your favorite place where podcasts are found, whether it be Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever they can be found. Like, subscribe, and make sure you get push notifications directly to your phone so you don't miss great content like this.
I never knew that a Minnesota accent could be so sexy until I heard Adam's voice.
Go fuck yourself, don't you know?
That's my boy, don't you know?